William Howard Taft served as the 27th President of the United States and as the 10th Chief Justice of the United States, the only person to have held both offices. Taft was elected president in 1908, the chosen successor of Theodore Roosevelt, but was defeated for re-election by Woodrow Wilson in 1912 after Roosevelt split the Republican vote by running as a third-party candidate. In 1921, President Warren G.Harding appointed Taft Chief Justice, a position in which he served until a few weeks before his death. Taft was born in Cincinnati in 1857. His father, Alphonso Taft, was a U.S. Attorney General and Secretary of War. William Taft attended Yale and was a member of Skull and Bones Secret Society like his father, and after becoming a lawyer was appointed a judge while still in his 20s. He continued a rapid rise, being named Solicitor General and as a judge of the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. President William McKinley appointed Taft civilian governor of the Philippines. In 1904, Roosevelt made him Secretary of War and he became Roosevelt's hand-picked successor. Despite his personal ambition to become Chief Justice, Taft declined repeated offers of appointment to the Supreme Court of the United States, believing his political work more important. With Roosevelt's help, Taft had little opposition for the Republican nomination for president in 1908, and easily defeated William Jennings Bryan for the presidency that November. In the White House, he focused on the Far East more than European affairs, and repeatedly intervened to prop up or remove Latin American governments. Taft sought reductions to trade tariffs, then a major source of governmental income, but the resulting bill was heavily influenced by special interests. His administration was filled with conflict between the conservative wing of the Republican Party, with which Taft often sympathized, and the progressive wing, toward which Roosevelt moved more and more. Controversies over conservation and over antitrust cases filed by the Taft administration served to further separate the two men. Roosevelt challenged Taft for re-nomination in 1912. Taft used his control of the party machinery to gain a bare majority of delegates, and Roosevelt bolted the party. The split left Taft with little chance of re-election, and in Wilson's victory won only Utah and Vermont. After leaving office, Taft returned to Yale as a professor, continuing his political activity and working against war through the League to enforce peace. In 1921, President Harding appointed Taft Chief Justice, an office he had long sought. Chief Justice Taft was a conservative on business issues, but under him, there were advances in individual rights. In poor health, he resigned in February 1930. After his death the next month, he was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, the first president and first Supreme Court justice to be interred there. Taft is generally listed near the middle in historians' rankings of U.S. presidents. Early life and education. William Howard Taft was born September 15, 1857, in Cincinnati, Ohio, to Alphonso Taft and Louise Torrey. The Taft family was not wealthy, living in a modest home in the suburb of Mount Auburn. Alphonso served as a judge, ambassador, and in the cabinet as War Secretary and Attorney General under Ulysses S. Grant. William Taft was not seen as brilliant as a child, but was a hard worker. The demanding parents pushed the five boys toward success, tolerating nothing less. He attended Woodward High School in Cincinnati. At Yale College, which he entered in 1874, the heavy-set, jovial Taft was popular. One classmate described him succeeding through hard work rather than being the smartest, with sterling integrity. In 1878, Taft graduated second in his class out of 121. He attended Cincinnati Law School, and graduated with a Bachelor of Laws in 1880. While in law school, he worked on the Cincinnati commercial newspaper, edited by Murad Halstead. Taft was assigned to cover the local courts, and also spent time reading law in his father's office. Both activities gave him practical knowledge of the law that was taught in no class. Shortly before graduating from a law school, Taft went to the state capital of Columbus to take the bar examination and easily passed. Rise in government. Ohio lawyer and judge. After admission to the Ohio bar, Taft devoted himself to his job at the commercial full-time. Halstead was willing to take him on permanently at an increase in salary if he would give up the law, but Taft declined. In October 1880, Taft was appointed assistant prosecutor for Hamilton County, and took office the following January. Taft served for a year as assistant prosecutor, trying his share of routine cases. He resigned in January 1882 after President Chester A. Arthur appointed him Collector of Internal Revenue for Ohio's 1st District, an area centered on Cincinnati. Taft refused to dismiss competent employees who were politically out of favor, and resigned effective in March 1883, writing to Arthur that he wished to begin private practice in Cincinnati. In 1884, Taft campaigned for the Republican candidate for president, Maine Senator James G. Blaine, who lost to New York Governor Grover Cleveland. In 1887, Taft, then aged 29, was appointed to a vacancy on the Superior Court of Cincinnati by Governor Joseph B. Foraker. The appointment was good for just over a year, after which he would have to face the voters, and in April 1888, he sought election for the first of 3 times in his lifetime, the other 2 being for the presidency. He was elected to a full 5-year term. Some 24 of Taft's opinions as a state judge survive, the most significant being Moores and Amp Co. v. Bricklayers Union No. 1, if only because it was used against him when he ran for president in 1908. The case involved bricklayers who refused to work for any firm that dealt with a company called Parker Brothers, with which they were in dispute. Taft ruled that the union's action amounted to a secondary boycott, which was illegal. It is not clear when Taft met Helen Herron, but it was no later than 1880, when she mentioned in her diary receiving an invitation to a party from him. By 1884, they were meeting regularly, and in 1885, after an initial rejection, she agreed to marry him. The wedding took place at the Herron home on June 19, 1886. William Taft remained devoted to his wife throughout their almost 44 years of marriage. Nellie Taft pushed her husband much as his parents had, and she could be very frank with her criticisms. The couple had 3 children, of which the eldest, Robert, became a U.S. Senator. Solicitor General. There was a seat vacant on the U.S. Supreme Court in 1889, and Governor Foraker suggested President Harrison appoint Taft to fill it. Taft was 32 and his professional goal was always a seat on the High Court. He actively sought the appointment, writing to Foraker to urge the governor to press his case, while stating to others it was unlikely he would get it. Instead, in 1890, Harrison appointed him Solicitor General of the United States. When Taft arrived in Washington in February 1890, the office had been vacant 2 months. With the work piling up, he worked to eliminate the backlog, while simultaneously educating himself on federal law and procedure he had not needed as an Ohio state judge. New York Senator William M. Evarts, a former Secretary of State, had been a classmate of Alphonso Taft at Yale. Evarts called to see his friend's son as soon as Taft took office, and William and Nellie Taft were launched into Washington society. Nellie Taft was ambitious for herself and her husband, and was annoyed when the people he socialized with most were mainly Supreme Court justices, rather than the arbiters of Washington society such as Theodore Roosevelt, John Hay, Henry Cabot Lodge and the wives. Although Taft was successful as Solicitor General, winning 15 of the 18 cases he argued before the Supreme Court, he was glad when in March 1891, Congress created a new judgeship for each of the United States Courts of Appeal and Harrison appointed him to the Sixth Circuit, based in Cincinnati. In March 1892, Taft resigned as Solicitor General to resume his judicial career. Federal judge. Taft's federal judgeship was a lifetime appointment, and one from which promotion to the Supreme Court might come. Taft's older half-brother Charles, successful in business, supplemented Taft's government salary, allowing William and Nellie Taft and the family to live in comfort. Taft's duties involved hearing trials in the circuit, which included Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and participating with Supreme Court Justice John Marshall Harlan, the Circuit Justice, and judges of the Sixth Circuit in hearing appeals. Taft spent 8 years of his life, from 1892 to 1900, in personal and professional contentment. According to historian Lewis L. Gould, while Taft shared the fears about social unrest that dominated the middle classes during the 1890s, he was not as conservative as his critics believe. He supported the right of labor to organize and strike, and he ruled against employers in several negligence cases. Among these was Voight v. Baltimore and AMP, Ohio Southwestern Railway Co. Taft's decision for a worker injured in a railway accident violated the contemporary doctrine of liberty of contract, and he was reversed by the Supreme Court. On the other hand, Taft's opinion in United States v. Eastern Pipe and Steel Co. was upheld unanimously by the High Court. Taft's opinion, in which he held that a pipe manufacturers association had violated the Sherman Antitrust Act, was described by Henry Pringle, his biographer, as having definitely and specifically revived that legislation. In 1896, Taft became dean and professor of property at his alma mater, the Cincinnati Law School, a post that required him to prepare and give 2-hour-long lectures each week. He was devoted to his law school, and was deeply committed to legal education, introducing the case system to the curriculum. As a federal judge, Taft could not involve himself with politics, but followed it closely, remaining a Republican supporter. He watched with some disbelief as the campaign of Ohio Governor William McKinley developed in 1894 and 1895, writing, "I cannot find anybody in Washington who wants him." By March 1896, Taft realized that McKinley would likely be nominated, and was lukewarm in his support. He landed solidly in McKinley's camp after former Nebraska Representative William Jennings Bryan in July stampeded the 1896 Democratic National Convention with his Cross of Gold speech. Bryan, both in that address and in his campaign, strongly advocated free silver, a policy that Taft saw as economic radicalism. Taft feared that people would hoard gold in anticipation of a Bryan victory, but he could do nothing but worry. McKinley was elected when a place on the Supreme Court opened in 1898, the only one under McKinley. The president named Joseph McKenna. Philippine years. In January 1900, Taft was called to Washington to meet with McKinley. Taft hoped a Supreme Court appointment was in the works, but instead McKinley wanted to place Taft on the commission to organize a civilian government in the Philippines. The appointment would require Taft's resignation from the bench. The president assured him that if he fulfilled this task, McKinley would appoint him to the next vacancy on the High Court. Taft accepted on condition he was made head of the commission, with responsibility for success failure. McKinley agreed, and Taft sailed for the islands in April 1900. Many Filipinos had responded to the American takeover with a fierce resistance, seeking independence for the islands, but U.S. forces, led by Military Governor General Arthur MacArthur, Jr., had the upper hand by 1900. MacArthur felt their commission was a nuisance, and the mission a quixotic attempt to impose self-government on a people unready for it. The general was forced to cooperate with Taft, as McKinley had given the commission control over the island's military budget. The commission took executive power in the Philippines on September 1, 1900. On July 4, 1901, Taft became civilian governor. MacArthur, until then the military governor, was relieved by General Abner Chaffee, who was designated only as commander of American forces. Taft sought to make the Filipinos partners in a venture that would lead to the self-government. He saw independence as something far off. Many Americans in the Philippines viewed the locals as racial inferiors, but Taft wrote soon before his arrival, "We propose to banish this idea from the minds." Taft did not impose segregation at official events, and treated the Filipinos as social equals. Nellie Taft recalled that neither politics nor race should influence our hospitality in any way. McKinley was assassinated in September 1901, and was succeeded by Theodore Roosevelt. Taft and Roosevelt had first become friends around 1890 while Taft was Solicitor General and Roosevelt a member of the Civil Service Commission. Taft had, after McKinley's election, urged the appointment of Roosevelt as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and watched as Roosevelt became a war hero, Governor of New York, and Vice President of the United States. They met again when Taft went to Washington in January 1902 to recuperate after two operations caused by an infection. There, Taft testified before the Senate Committee on the Philippines. Taft wanted to have Filipino farmers to have a stake in the new government through land ownership, but much of the arable land was held by Catholic religious orders, priests who were mostly Spanish, and were often resented by the Filipinos. Roosevelt had Taft go to Rome to negotiate with Pope Leo XIII to purchase the lands and to arrange the withdrawal of the Spanish priests, with Americans replacing them and training locals as clergy. Taft did not succeed in resolving these issues on his visit to Rome, but an agreement on both points was made in 1903. In late 1902, Taft had heard from Roosevelt that a seat on the Supreme Court would soon fall vacant on the resignation of Justice George Shiras, and Roosevelt desired that Taft fill it. Although this was Taft's professional goal, he refused as he felt his work as governor was not yet done. One reason for Roosevelt's action was his desire to neutralize a potential rival for the presidency. Taft's success in the Philippines had not gone unnoticed in the American press. The following year, Roosevelt asked Taft to become Secretary of War. As the War Department was responsible for the Philippines, Taft would remain responsible for the islands, and Root was willing to postpone his departure until 1904, allowing Taft time to wrap up his work in Manila. After consulting with his family, Taft agreed, and sailed from the United States in December 1903. Secretary of War. When Taft took office as Secretary of War in January 1904, he was not called upon to spend much time administering the army, which the president was content to do himself. Roosevelt wanted him as a troubleshooter in difficult situations, as a legal advisor, and to be able to give campaign speeches as he sought election in his own right. Taft strongly defended Roosevelt's record in his addresses, and wrote of the president's successful but strenuous efforts to gain election, "I would not run for president if you guaranteed the office." It is awful to be afraid of one's shadow. Between 1905 and 1907, Taft came to terms with the likelihood he would be the next Republican nominee for president, though he did not plan to actively campaign for it. When Justice Henry B. Brown resigned in 1905, Taft would not accept the seat although Roosevelt offered it, a position Taft held till when another seat opened in 1906. Edith Roosevelt, the First Lady, disliked the growing closeness between the two men, feeling they were too much alike, and that the president did not gain much from the advice of someone who rarely contradicted him. Alternatively, Taft wanted to be Chief Justice, and kept a close eye on the health of the aging incumbent Melville Fuller, who turned 75 in 1908. Taft believed Fuller likely to live many years. Roosevelt had indicated he was likely to appoint Taft if the opportunity came to fill the court's center seat. Woodstham considered Attorney General Philander Knox a better candidate. In any event, Fuller remained Chief Justice throughout Roosevelt's presidency. Through the 1903 Panamanian Revolution and the Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty, the United States had secured rights to build a canal in the Isthmus of Panama. Legislation authorizing construction did not specify which government department would be responsible, and Roosevelt designated the Department of War. Taft journeyed to Panama in 1904, viewing the canal site and meeting with Panamanian officials. The Isthmian Canal Commission had trouble keeping a chief engineer, and when in February 1907 John D. Stevens submitted his resignation, Taft recommended an Army engineer, George W. Goethals. Under Goethals, the project moved ahead smoothly. Another colony lost by Spain in 1898 was Cuba, but as freedom for Cuba had been a major purpose of the war, it was not annexed by the U.S. but was, after a period of occupation, given independence in 1902. Election fraud and corruption followed, as did factional conflict. In September 1906, President Thomas Estrada Palmer asked for U.S. intervention. Taft traveled to Cuba with a small American force, and on September 29, 1906, under the terms of the Cuban-American Treaty of Relations of 1903, declared himself provisional governor of Cuba, a post he held for 2 weeks before being succeeded by Charles Edward Magoon. In his time in Cuba, Taft worked to persuade Cubans that the U.S. intended stability, not occupation. Taft remained involved in Philippine affairs. During Roosevelt's election campaign in 1904, he urged that Philippine agricultural products be admitted to the U.S. without duty. This caused growers of U.S. sugar and tobacco to complain to Roosevelt, who remonstrated with his Secretary of War. Taft expressed unwillingness to change his position, and threatened to resign. Roosevelt hastily dropped the matter. Taft returned to the islands in 1905, leading a delegation of congressmen, and again in 1907, to open the first Philippine Assembly. On both of his Philippine trips as Secretary of War, Taft went to Japan, and met with officials there. The meeting in July 1905 came a month before the conference which would end the Russo-Japanese War with the Treaty of Portsmouth. Taft met with Japanese Prime Minister Katsura Taro. After that meeting, the two signed a memorandum with Japan indicating it had no desire to invade the Philippines, and the U.S. that it did not object to Japanese control of Korea. There were U.S. concerns about the number of Japanese laborers coming to the West Coast, and during Taft's second visit in September 1907, Tadasu Hayashi, the foreign minister, informally agreed to issue fewer passports to them.